What's up, you guys? Welcome to today's video. As you can tell by the title, we're going to be talking about disabilities in prison. What happens if you go to prison blind? What happens if you go to prison and you are deaf? What happens if you go to prison and you have some kind of pretty severe disability? That's what we're going to cover today. If you guys are new here, hi, my name is Jess. I'm a person in long-term recovery who has served time in prison, and my entire crazy life story is in the description box down below. If you want to follow me on any other social media platform, TikTok, Instagram, Patreon, that's $2. It's only ever going to be $2. All of that is linked down below, as well as a link to Groups Recover Together, who I am a proud partner with. Groups is available in 12 states with both in-person and outpatient treatment, and they strongly lean on harm reduction, and they're just the most incredible team of people. So I will leave their link and my hotline number with them in the description box as well. All right, let's kick this thing off. You might be asking yourself why it is we're talking about people with disabilities in prison, or how a blind person would go to prison, or how a deaf person would go to prison. How would they commit these crimes? As somebody who has served time with a woman that was blind and in for murder, I can attest to they are not immune to serving prison time or falling into bad situations, or, even being the victim of bad situations. And when I say victim of bad situations but still in prison, I have done a lot of time with women that have killed their abusers. And man, that is just a whole video that I'm gonna have to film for you guys. Another thing that can happen is these disabilities can happen later into their prison sentence. So maybe they committed their crime and they were not blind. Maybe they committed their crime and they were not deaf, but after serving 20, 30 years in prison, as they start to get older, these things happen, or they become sick or what have you. So the first thing to just kind of keep in mind there is when people are serving life sentences, they go in at 20 and now they're 60 and blind, or 60 and deaf, or have some kind of illness like that, the prison has to accommodate for that. So if you go to prison and you are not blind, but then eventually become blind for whatever circumstance, the prison has to make sure that you are okay. If you go into prison blind or deaf, they also have to accommodate you. Now, this isn't something that I have personally seen. Like, I haven't seen someone get arrested blind and be put in GP. But I have met women that were both legally blind and completely blind. Having met them at a lower level security prison, which is where you have to be housed if you have some kind of issue like that, some disability. The woman that stands out in my mind who was serving a life sentence for a murder charge, and I don't know the circumstances of it, but I do know that she was released just a year ago or so, or maybe a couple years ago. She was blind and she had a stick or a cane, and they allowed her to keep that. And a lot of women wanted to help her out, and she did not need help. She did not need help. She could move around that compound better than I could, probably. The prison had to allow her to have that tool so that she could move around the compound, and she could. She could move around any compound or barracks or what have you, and she didn't need any help, despite, a lot of the other women wanting to help her. So if you are deaf, will the prisons allow you to keep your earpieces? Yes, you have to be able to hear. And I know there's a wide range of hearing impairment. So if you are on that scale at all and you have hearing aids, the prison has to allow you to have them, because in that circumstance, it is a disability and they have to be able to, hear. It's just unconstitutional to take hearing aids away from anyone, whether they're incarcerated or not. I think a lot of times when we're talking about disabilities and we're talking about inmates, people have a tendency to say, well, what if this scenario happens? And they just throw these hypothetical scenarios out there. What if this woman that has this cane beat someone to death with it? Well, oh my gosh, obviously the prison would punish that person. Or what if someone else grabbed this woman's cane and beat someone to death with it? Well, oh my God, the prison would obviously hold that person responsible, and more than likely, they wouldn't be able to kill somebody with that. More than likely, the fight would be stopped before it reached that level. Even in instances where one inmate is stabbing another, they might not necessarily die from that. Prison shanks are typically small. I have seen machetes, but they're typically small. So they're just really just surface wounds. They're not getting in there deep, and it's super, super fast. So even in instances where an inmate is shanking another inmate, a lot of times corrections officers have the time to intervene and stop that before it turns deadly. To say that What if this person takes it from that person? I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure someone can find a scenario where someone has hit someone with a stick. I mean, but at the end of the day, the prison has a responsibility to make sure that each inmate can move around the compound, can move around the barracks, and they have access to the things that they need. Now, bear in mind, when I met the woman that we were discussing that was blind, she was at a medium security prison, and all of the officers and all of the inmates were well aware of her disability, and it just wasn't an issue. Also, it is prison etiquette and prison 101 that if someone is weaker than you, or if someone has some kind of illness or disability, it is prison etiquette 101 that you do not overpower someone that is weaker than you in the sense that they have a disability or what have you, some kind of severe mental illness. Inmates don't like when stronger inmates are taking control over weaker inmates. And that's just what I've seen all my life and just across the board. It's why men do not tolerate chomos on the yard in GP. They do not tolerate men that have hurt women, and they do not tolerate men that have hurt children. Because if someone is stronger and they have hurt an innocent person or a weaker person, whether that is a female, a child, whatever, then that man is going to be hurt by other inmates. It's the same logic. It's the same logic here. We will not overpower and hurt someone with a disability in prison. And we have prison etiquette and we have prison rules, and we just do not believe, like I said, in hurting people that are struggling. Just to kind of give you another example of this, inmates do have to be careful about who they stick up for. So I would absolutely stick up for anyone that was blind or deaf or had a disability like that. I would have beat someone up if they tried to take her cane, or they tried to hurt her, or they tried to steal from her or do anything to her. I would have gone to the hole for that. But this happens all the time in prison, where someone that is maybe stronger or more manipulative or what have you will try to overpower someone that is weaker. It does happen all the time. And we see this in commissary. So just to give you guys like a quick story, I was at a medium security prison, and this girl came in and she was really green, meaning that she was a first timer. She didn't really know what to do. She wasn't very assertive. She was very passive. You could tell that she was probably a little scared. And the other inmates kept getting her commissary. You know, and I probably watched this happen for a couple of weeks before I said something, but you have to be careful who you stick up for. So she would just give them a soup here, coffee here, and they would constantly come up to her bed and ask her for stuff, and she would constantly just give it to them. And you could tell she didn't want to, but she also didn't want to get beat up for it, which fair, right? Who the heck wants to get beat up? Literally nobody. But it was just making me crazy that they were doing that. And other women were starting to get upset about it too, because dude, stop. Like she looked so young, which I did too. She looked so young. You could tell she'd never done time before. Stop it. One day I just was having a bad day and I just had enough. And I decided to go up to that situation and tell them to back off. And if they wanted her commissary, they have to go through me. And I'm like, they're gonna kick my I can't fight 4 of them on one, but for whatever reason, they just are like, chill, New York, chill. Which, by the way, is not a nickname I gave myself. They just called me that in Arkansas, because if you're doing time in a different state, they'll call you the state that you're from. Anyway, they're like, all right, calm down. So I'm like, oh, cool. Whew, thank God, because they could have got me, right? And they walked away, and I told this girl, grow a freaking backbone, bro. Like, tell them no. And every day since then, we were friends. She actually picked me up from prison because I didn't have a ride. But that's an instance where it bothers me to see other inmates taking advantage of someone that they see as weaker, or someone that's brand new, or someone that is green, or someone that has a disability. It bothers me. It bothers me to my core, and I will defend whoever I can that I feel is deserving of that. It's very tough in prison to decide who to roll with, who to ride with, who is deserving of your loyalty or a fight. Prison's no joke, you know? So I also wanted to talk about cancer, because you guys ask me this all the time. What happens if you have cancer and you go to prison? A lot of times people will find out they have cancer in prison, and that's a really difficult thing to deal with. The prison ultimately can't deny you medical treatment. So the prison, by law, has to do something. And when they don't do something and an inmate dies, they can and have been held responsible. So if you're diagnosed with cancer in prison, they legally have to take you to your chemotherapy sessions. And I have met women with cancer in prison. I've met women that were waiting to get chemotherapy sessions. I have met women that were mid-chemotherapy sessions. And that is such a hard thing. Could you imagine just for a second being in prison, finding out that you have cancer, and now you have to go through that very grueling, very demanding treatment, radiation, and all of these things, all of these appointments by yourself? With a prison guard on your shoulder, no family or friends, and every day you go to your appointments, shackled up in chains, and everyone knows that you're in prison at these facilities. And I know that because I, gave birth in prison, and everyone knew when I was going to the free clinic and when I had to go to my outside appointment, and then ultimately when I gave birth, everyone knew that I was an inmate. It was so embarrassing. So could you imagine going through all of that and every day coming back to prison, not knowing if you're gonna live or die, not knowing if you're gonna be okay? Maybe you don't even have money to call home to tell your family, like, my therapy's going good, chemotherapy is going great, I'm doing good, or I'm not. That's a really hard thing. And before you say don't break the law, most people are serving time in prison on non-violent drug offenses. One of the women that I knew, I wish I could find her. She was such a sweet soul. She was in for the same thing I was in for. She was older than me and was diagnosed with cancer, and I had to watch her go to her treatments. Her hair fell out, and it was so gut-wrenching. And she was the most positive, the most kind, the most amazing woman that I've ever met. She was so loved in our dorm that all of the women that knew how came together and made her hats and bandanas and things for her head because her hair was falling out. And it was just the most kind, sweetest thing I've ever seen when she came back from her chemotherapy and she had hats waiting for her on her bed. So let's talk about wheelchairs, walkers, not having mobility, and what happens when an inmate physically starts to deteriorate for whatever reason, old age, some kind of illness, or what have you. If you break your leg, you get crutches, and they have to treat it. If you are older and you need a wheelchair, the prison has to provide you one. If you need a walker, the prison also has to provide you with that. So that is a really tough thing too. As a short timer, I would see women, a lot of older women, and I would see them in wheelchairs and walkers, and sometimes they would have canes. And again, the prison has to supply that because they have to be able to move around the compound. That was a hard thing, to know in your heart that this woman is going to die here, and to see how they're aging, and they're aging alone. They're going to chow with the rest of us alone in a wheelchair. They're not having dinner with their family. And that was just a hard thing to see. No matter what they did, no matter the circumstance of their crime, it's still a very difficult thing to have to live your natural life out in prison and die there alone. And it's a hard thing to watch happen. That was something that when I was first getting locked up, I didn't really pay much attention to. But as I got older in my last bid and had my daughter there, I started to pay closer attention to who those women were and what their stories were. And I did my best to hear as many stories as I could because I wanted to get to know them, and my love for psychology and corrections and prison reform just grew. It also grew from a place of anger because I saw a lot of abuse, but my heart has always been with those women that are there and that have to die there. I know that these women that have life without the possibility of parole have victims, and my heart also goes out to the victims of those families, and I hope they've all made peace with that situation because it's just not easy. I firmly believe in prison reform, but I also believe that some people should never get out of prison, and I do believe that some people are just too violent to get out. I'm gonna end today's video here. I really hope this shed light on what people go through with disabilities in prison. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comment section down below. As always, I love you guys. Stay safe, stay in recovery, whatever that looks like to you, and I will see you in my next one. As you can tell by the title, we're gonna be talking about, what are we talking about? Oh my God, disabilities. Shit. I just have such a squirrel brain, my brain is like that of a squirrel trying to cross the road, and I just completely lose track of where I even am.